Today, Focal is announcing the release of their new closed-back flagship headphone, the Focal Stellia. The Focal Stellia follows last year's release of the Focal Elegia with improvements over the Elegia that, in terms of sonic performance, materials, build quality, and style, placed the Stellia, in my opinion, clear ahead of the Elegia. Now, Nicolas Debard from Focal flew in for a visit to HeadFi HQ late last year to drop off a Stellia for us to listen to, and we took the opportunity then to interview the man who probably knows Focal's headphones as well as anyone. Now, if you haven't already seen our video about the Elegia, please do click on the link in the description to watch it. In that video, we talk about key design elements of the Elegia that the Stellia shares with it, and we do go into more detail about some of those things in that video. Now, let's get to our discussion with Nicolas Debard about the new closed-back Focal flagship headphone, the Focal Stellia. So Nicolas, I'm very excited about the Stellia because you have a flagship line of headphones, and this is now one of the flagships of that flagship line. So the Utopia is the open-back flagship, this is the closed-back flagship. What was sort of the thought behind the Stellia and where it fits in the line?
Well, basically, obviously, as you said, it's our flagship approach in terms of closed-back design pair of headphones, and also in terms of, I would say, market approach. We wanted to come out with the very best we could achieve in terms of both R&D as well as design, as you can see, using very, very high-end raw materials and so on, from the design standpoint up to, obviously, the drivers, which is our core know-how and what we are famous for.
Yeah, now the sound and what goes into it is the most important thing in any of this. But there's no way I'm going to avoid talking about the appearance, because there's no other headphone that I can think of that looks remotely like it. I love the way the Elegia looks, but this is like next level, not just for like vis-a-vis the Elegia, I mean, but period. The materials, the leather, so that's the materials on this headphone are incredible. The look of the headphone, which I hope you can see in our photos, is incredible. Tell us about the design and the materials, because the leather on it is very supple and it feels like something that you like, very high-end.
Yeah, it's the very best grade of leather you can find. It's a full grain leather. And here all the finishes in terms of colors are a mix of, because we are French, cognac,
right,
and mocha as well.
Okay. Yeah, the colors are beautiful, the combination. We were talking about it, I was talking about it with Brian, because right when we took it out of the box, we were really stunned at its appearance. The one thing I want to point out, which I don't know that it's obvious, hopefully again in the photos you can see the circles on the ear cup. That's a metal, that's a metal frame above leather.
Yeah, this is stainless steel.
So it's stainless steel that forms the pattern over the same leather that's on the headband.
The very same.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous headphone. What about the ear pads, which we'll get to as far as sonics go in a second?
Yeah, ear pads are basically leather ear pads as well,
okay,
with the same finishes, mocha and cognac.
And they're real leather.
Yeah.
And obviously the rest. You said, what was the French word for the type of leather?
Cuir pleine fleur.
Okay, all right, yeah. I'm not going to say that, but anyways, it's a beautiful leather. So now let's talk about the sound. This is the most important part, but I did have to mention the looks. But where does this fit in terms of, you have the Elegia already, which is a closed back, and how does this slot in there? So let's talk about the sound, and then we'll talk about maybe some of the engineering differences.
Right. Basically, in terms of sound, here, I would say Elegia is already a very revealing closed-back design pair of headphones. With Stellia, it's even more on many, many areas, be it in the lowest part of the audio spectrum, from the lower bass up to super high frequencies. This is an extremely revealing pair of headphones. Obviously, since it's a closed-back pair of headphones, the idea was to make it more mobile-friendly, so those are extremely easy to drive as well. They do have the very same impedance than the Elegia, so 35 ohms.
Okay.
Those makes really easy to drive with any iris portable player and so on.
So the key difference now in terms of drivers to achieve this different sound, and I love the sound signature of it. I prefer it to the Elegia myself. It's a little richer in tone down low, which I like a lot. I mean, that's just my taste. But it's not in any way heavy. It's still very, very defined and fast down low, but there is, to my ears, I don't know if you agree, a little bit more richness down low. And throughout the audio band, I'll agree, it is more revealing. I mean, this is more, but so let's talk about the driver differences. I think something about the driver and I think that's a Focal fan is probably already guessing what that difference is going to be, but I'll let you say it.
Right. Basically, here we are using the very same dome technology and geometry than the Utopia headphones. So it's a pure beryllium M-shaped dome.
So it is, and it's pure. It's not beryllium coated.
No, it's pure.
Pure beryllium through and through. Okay.
Yeah. 100%. The beryllium dome. As you've been to Focal, you visited the company. You saw that we do manufacture the domes by ourselves as well. There, I mean, one of the key points with beryllium is this raw material is basically matching the three key criteria we are always looking at when it comes to a dome design, which is super high rigidity. That way you have no distortion, even up to super high SPL. Very, very good damping. That way, when you have very difficult voices or frequencies to reproduce, you just reproduce the frequencies, nothing more, nothing less, because there is no ringing or resonance effect.
Right.
And the other point is it's extremely light. For the same mass, it's 7 times more rigid than titanium. So that's the reason why, thanks to this super high rigidity grade, we can go for something like super, super thin beryllium sheets. That way we make it extremely, extremely light.
So the diaphragm would be, I mean, I think the answer is obvious, but I'll ask anyway. The diaphragm is then, it has quite a bit less mass, would you say, the diaphragm itself than the Elegia's?
Way less, way less.
All right.
Way less because, first of all, it's thinner, plus it's pure beryllium. So it's way less heavy. So
and yet still more rigid.
And it's still more rigid.
All right.
Still more rigid. So this, along with the formless voice coil and the obviously surround, makes it extremely light in terms of mobile mass equipment. That way it's extremely fast to react to any single details in the audio spectrum.
Okay, so I want to talk about the formless voice coil. We talked about it with the Focal Stellia and Utopia video. I don't think we've ever really detailed it since, and I don't think I want to assume that everybody that's watching this has watched that video. So just briefly, let's explain what a formless voice coil is.
Right. Usually on a regular voice coil design, you always have a former, which is here to...
a hard cylindrical material, like a rigid cylindrical material.
Exactly.
That you're wrapping the coil around.
This is it.
Okay. But it actually stays on there and moves with the coil, yeah.
This is it, but the limit of it is the mass that this involves. So it's really okay when it comes to regular drivers for hi-fi speakers or whatsoever. But on a pair of headphones, as long as you keep on using a former, you add a lot of mass to the driver itself in terms of mobile equipment, and then it makes it super, super difficult to achieve a very, very revealing sound, because the mobile mass is way too much. So that way you are hiding a lot of details, and very simply the driver cannot react immediately. So
by removing the former, this cylinder of material that typically is used to wrap the coil around, and so you obviously have a coil, it's holding its shape somehow. I'm not sure exactly how you're doing this. I've seen the coil, it's pretty cool, and it's like, how much lighter is it? I mean, at least give me some idea, like some relative.
I mean, you easily decrease the mass by 60 or 70%, depending on the former you're using.
Really?
So it really depends, obviously, on the former and the amount of layers you have on the voice coil. But I would say, on average, let's make it between 40 and 60%, depending on the voice coil design and the former design as well.
All right, now correct me if I'm wrong. So when he says, and I think we've talked about this with all of the videos, when you say mobile equipment, you mean those parts of the driver that are actually moving when playing.
Which is basically in
the coil.
headphones driver, voice coil, surround, and dome.
Okay.
On a regular driver made for hi-fi, you have one more component, which is the spider, which is here to maintain the very back of the mobile equipment linked with the chassis of the driver.
Okay. Now, with this headphone, you have the beryllium diaphragm or the cone or the dome.
Yeah.
Is exactly the same beryllium dome that's in the Utopia,
The exact same geometry.
but the driver in its entirety is quite a bit different, correct?
It's totally different because here, if we want to make the analogy between closed back and open back headphones, it's more like putting the very same pair of speakers in a small or a large room. Obviously, the speaker will not perform the same way depending on the room size and room acoustic. If you put a big pair of speakers in a tiny room, no change, those will perform well. That's why when you do have to design drivers for closed-back design headphones, you have to make sure that you will match the requirements of the acoustic load you will get. What I mean is, here, obviously the acoustic load is way smaller compared to an open-back design. That means you need a very low compliance as far as the surround is concerned, in order to make sure that you will properly control the displacement of the mobile equipment.
Okay, so I like the room analogy. It's something that you speaker guys like to use,
Yeah,
which
that's
I really
our
enjoy.
background.
So essentially, you're trying to solve the problem of a very large speaker, relatively speaking, in a very, very small room.
Exactly.
And small by its closed back nature.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about this in the Elegia video. Actually, a little bit more about it. Let's talk about it at least briefly here. Part of that is dealing with the resonance, right? That you've introduced the back of the headphone or the back of the ear cup behind the driver.
Yeah.
You have reflections. You guys have designed a pretty clever diffusion mechanism or diffuser mechanism or design in the back.
Exactly, yeah.
Is it the same as what's in the Elegia?
It's the same principle, exactly, because here the idea is the very same. What I mean is the driver design is done now, okay? So you have the proper speaker size for your proper room size. However, if you just keep the room with raw walls and so on, it will not sound good. Because obviously the absorption and diffusion ratio is not so good. So you have to also fine-tune these two key parameters. It's like in a control room in a studio, you always have to match those two things. You have to absorb the extra energy not to have a room that could be pretty boomy in the bass. And also you have to diffuse the energy to avoid the back wave coming back in. Because if you just don't, then the back wave, when the driver will come in, will touch the back ear cup and will come again and will obviously make the mobile equipment move a tiny bit. And this will move not due to the audio signal, but due to the reflection of the back wave.
Gotcha.
And that we don't want. So that's why we developed that kind of diffuser design within the back ear cup.
It's like this one, the Elegia has the pyramid type diffusers.
The exact same shape for these ones, so that kind of pyramid, that way you split all the energy all across the volume of the headphones. And also the cool part of it is, right now it's something you can find more often in some tiny control rooms in the studio industry. You have ports to get rid of the extra amount of energy, mainly from the bass side of it.
Like the rooms are actually ported.
Of the room, yes.
Okay.
Because nowadays rooms are getting smaller, smaller and smaller, so that way you have to deal with acoustic energy even more. Because you still want to control everything down to the lowest frequencies. However, your room is small, so you have to make it bigger compared to what it is actually. So you use ports in the wall, behind the front wall, and that way you get rid of the excess of energy. And this is exactly what we did on Elegia and Stellia. So here, basically behind the flame, you have a port which is linked with the back of the driver, and you get rid of the excess of energy thanks to the port which is underneath the driver.
So the Focal logo, as with the Elegia, is actually a port opening.
This is it, yeah.
And then you're using, I remember you mentioned in the Elegia video that there's damping or some sort of material there.
Exactly, so this is step one, get rid of the excess of energy. Step two, with the diffusers we talked about. And step three is the absorption ratio. Because in a room, if you leave the walls like bare walls, that's going to be a bit tricky because your room's going to be pretty live. You will have a lot of echo, reverb, and so on, and that you don't want to. This is the reason why just behind the driver we have a foam which is here to absorb part of the energy as well.
Okay, and the pads are actually quite a bit different too. The ear pads themselves are quite a bit different than...
Yeah, the ear pads there, the cushions on Stellia inside are made of a 50-50% ratio. 50% from the driver to the middle of it is made of fabric. That way you absorb part of the energy, so it's kind of absorption. And the other part is made of leather. That way you diffuse the energy as well.
Okay. So earlier we talked about the aesthetic. I'm not ready to drop that just yet because, again, it's one of the most beautiful headphones I've ever seen or felt. It is a beautiful headphone. And I also love the way you guys package it. I think when you buy a flagship headphone, this is kind of what you hope for when you're opening it up. It was an experience.
It's something very important when you, as you said, when you buy a flagship product, be it a car or whatever. The very first feeling you have with your new super high-end toy is very important. So right from the packaging, the very first second when you open the product is here to, let's say, 100% match with the headphones at some point. And this is critical. So that's the reason why we went for the very same finishes, colors and so on, down to the packaging by itself.
Right, it's a very rich combination of colors and touch and
exactly,
feel.
yeah.
Yeah, and the nice thing about it all is it's not just all flash. I mean, now we go back to the most important part, and it's the engineering and the sound. And as closed headphones go, it has to be one of the best closed headphones made.
This was our goal, so I hope we reached it.
Oh yeah, you reached it. I think you know you reached it.
we really wanted to come out with a stunning closed back design pair of headphones, because at some point many times you cannot really enjoy your music with open back design pair of headphones because you are in a more noisy environment or you don't want to disturb your neighbor or whatsoever. That's why closed back design is important, but most of the time it's really hard to achieve a very good sounding pair of headphones in a closed back design, because once again it's like putting a huge pair of speakers in a tiny room. You need a lot of attention to every single details.
Yeah, no, and you can hear it with it, versus just about every other closed headphone you'll listen to. You can hear it. Yeah, anyway, fantastic job. So congratulations on the Stellia.
Thank you.
The Focal Stellia is easily one of the top closed-back headphones, in my opinion, in terms of technical performance, in terms of sound quality. However, for my tastes, I found the Focal Stellia a bit leaner sounding in the bass than I find ideal, so I'd often use a parametric equalizer to give it a low shelf lift for more body, and it does respond beautifully to that. However, with the Stellia, I no longer need to EQ, because with the Stellia comes the extra body I'd EQ into the Stellia, but with the added benefit of more overall resolving ability, more crystalline clearer treble without any additional brightness to my ears, and greater presence. Now, in the case of their open backs, I'm willing to sacrifice some resolution for tonal balance, preferring the Focal Clear's tonal balance to the flagship Utopia's. However, with their closed back flagships, the beryllium drivered Stellia has both better tonal balance for my tastes and greater resolving ability than the Stellia. The Focal Stellia is, in my opinion, easily one of the best closed-back headphones you can buy today. And if you're looking for a closed-back flagship class headphone, auditioning the Stellia with your other candidates is an absolute must. Anyway, thanks for watching this episode of HeadFi TV. We'll see you next time and on the forums at headfi.org.